Hello, and good evening, everyone. It's wonderful to have you here. I'm Katie Dyson, Assistant Director in Engagement Programs. I'm delighted to welcome you to today's lecture, fittingly held during Women's History Month. As we begin, a brief reminder to please silence your mobile devices. And now it is my pleasure to introduce the speaker for this evening's program, Annelise Madsen. Annelise is the Gilda and Henry Buchbinder Associate Curator in Arts of the Americas. A specialist in U.S. painting, sculpture, and visual culture, she holds a PhD in art history from Stanford University and a BA from Washington University in St. Louis. Since joining the Art Institute in 2011, she curated the exhibition John Singer Sargent and Chicago's Gilded Age and authored its catalog, and has co-curated and contributed to a number of other exhibitions and publications at the Art Institute. Additionally, she has contributed essays to Women Building History, Public Art at the 1893 Columbian Exposition, and the journals American Art and Winterthur Portfolio. Her current exhibition project is the upcoming Georgia O'Keeffe, My New Yorks, opening in June, and she is also preparing an exhibition on Mary Cassatt. Annelise is particularly interested in elevating historical women artists, studying artworks in the permanent collection, stewarding acquisitions, developing exhibitions and programming, and presenting new research in an effort to recover and revalue the contributions and stories of female makers. And it is this work she shares with us today. So without further delay, please join me in welcoming Annelise to the stage.
Good evening. It's wonderful to gather in this historic space of Fullerton Hall and to see so many of you in the audience tonight. I'm really thrilled for this opportunity to highlight and celebrate the myriad achievements of women artists, a group of makers that for far too long have been understudied, undervalued, and undercollected. My focus today will be on historical women painters and sculptors in the Americas collection, the area of the museum's collection that I help steward. I'll introduce you to names, stories, artworks that may not be familiar, but I believe deserve to be, and hopefully will gain recognition as efforts along these lines continue. I'll share some of the work that my colleagues and I are doing across the museum to expand narratives, create space for, and revalue female makers in the galleries. Many of the artworks that I discussed tonight are on view, and I encourage you to seek out what interests you and to fully enjoy the experience of viewing the actual objects here during your visit to the museum. May this lecture propel you into the galleries with keen eyes and renewed curiosity. Perhaps unexpectedly, I'm going to kick things off with a work by a male artist. This is The Fountain by John Singer Sargent. There's a good chance you know his name. Sargent was a highly accomplished painter. He garnered international renown in his own time in the late 19th to early 20th centuries, and his fame persists today. Sargent's works are well represented in museum collections, including our own. He was best known as a portraitist, but after 1900, he spent more and more time painting outdoors. And although not titled as such, The Fountain is both a landscape and a portrait. And that's where I'd like to focus our attention, on the woman at center in her white painting smock, palette and brushes in hand at her easel. This is Jane Emmet DeGlenn, an American painter. Lounging next to her is her husband, another artist, Wilfred DeGlenn. So we can imagine Sargent and Jane DeGlenn both at work, Sargent painting her amid the greenery and the spray of the fountain, and DeGlenn capturing a plein air view of the surrounding scenery. The trio traveled and painted together on a number of trips here in the Roman countryside in 1907. The Fountain offers a glimpse of a remarkable lineage of women painters. Jane Emmet DeGlenn was one of several women in the Emmet family who pursued a career in the arts. Jane's older sisters, Rosina Emmet Sherwood and Lydia Field Emmet, had forged their own professional paths before her. In some ways, Sargent's painting helped me arrive here. This is Emmet Rand, Woman Before the Mirror. Another Emmet and another successful artist. Ellen was Jane's cousin. It was a particularly satisfying endeavor to bring this work into the Art Institute's collection a few years ago. For context, Sargent's painting has been here since 1914 and Rand since 2019. Sisters Rosina and Lydia had been familiar names to me because of research I had done long ago, and Sargent's work highlighted anew for me the presence of Jane. And then came Ellen. I discovered Woman Before the Mirror on a dealer's website, and it really just arrested my attention. The Emmet name further piqued my interest, and so I inquired about the painting and dug into some initial research. There are certain acquisition possibilities that really take hold of you, and this was definitely one of them, as in you wake up in the middle of the night and realize you're still thinking about it and how you're going to make this acquisition happen. One of the hurdles of bringing overlooked artists into the collection is that the names are new for so many. How do you advocate to fill a gap in the collection when some among the crowd don't perceive that a gap even exists in the first place? So many women artists have slipped through the mainstream histories of art. Later in the talk, I'll address some of the ways that I, as curator, aim to connect biographies, objects, and archives to support such acquisitions, as well as lay groundwork for further study. We'll also return to Emmet Rand for the moment. The example of Woman Before the Mirror demonstrates one step forward in our efforts to expand the roster of women artists in the galleries. Now, I don't typically use a hashtag in the title of one of my lectures, but for this topic, it made perfect sense to do so. Can you name 5 women artists? This is the challenge issued by the National Museum of Women in the Arts in Washington, D.C. in the form of a social media campaign. In asking the question, they are posing another. Shouldn't you be able to name more? The hashtag 5womenartists was launched by the museum in 2016 to raise awareness about gender inequity in museums, the art market, and narratives of art history. Cultural institutions, art professionals, and art enthusiasts around the world have, in turn, amplified this call to account. Here are a couple of examples of the kinds of posts the National Museum of Women in the Arts has shared. Images like the one on the left highlight artists in their collection, in this case, Julie Dix, an American miniaturist. This post is part of the work of naming names, a crucial first step and one that needs much repeating. And I love that she titled this portrait, Me. Other posts crunch the numbers, such as the one on the right. 11% of all acquisitions at 26 prominent US museums over the past decade were work by women artists. And so this means between 2008 and 2018, the time of this study, 89% of new works entering major museum collections were by men. There are also posts that share the voices of women. Here, the contemporary artist Judy Chicago. She said, quote, "The truth is that for centuries, women have struggled to be heard, writing books, making art and music, and challenging the many restrictions on women's lives. But their achievements have been repeatedly written out of history," unquote. These 3 examples, surfacing names and objects, recognizing deficits and inequities institutionally, and writing newly recovered histories back into the narratives of art, align with similar efforts underway here across the museum. In the Arts of the Americas department, we care for a diverse collection of objects from North, Central, and South America, spanning 5,000 BCE to the present, including art by indigenous, Mesoamerican, Andean, colonial era, and US makers. Here I'm showing a screenshot of the collection search on the Art Institute's website. As a curatorial team, we have endeavored over the last several years to make strategic acquisitions across our various collecting areas of works by female artists, a vast group of makers that must include artists of color, immigrants, indigenous artists, and unknown female makers, alongside Euro-American artists. In some cases, we've been able to augment our presentation of women artists with key long-term loans. Let's return to some of the numbers on collecting practices at U.S. art museums. At right is that 11% statistic on acquisitions referenced by the National Museum of Women in the Arts in their social media post. At left is another study conducted in 2019 called Diversity of Artists at Major U.S. Museums, which used the technique of data scraping from open digital sources to analyze various diversity measurements at 18 major museums, the Art Institute among them. Now, this method of gathering data can only be as good or accurate as the data shared online by each institution. Nevertheless, the trend regarding women artists is clear. Across the institutions surveyed, women represented an average of 12.6% of the collections. At the Art Institute specifically, it was 12.5%, so on par with the broader picture. Here are further statistics from a study called the Burns-Halperin Report, published in 2022 concerning exhibitions and acquisitions. The category of female maker or female identifying makers is not monolithic, and this investigation broke out the numbers in different ways. For instance, looking at the metrics on the right side of this graph, acquisitions of works by women held steady from the prior report at 11%. But when looking specifically at works by Black women artists in the US, that percentage drops to a dismal 0.5% or half a percentage point of total acquisitions. Further, the collecting practices of the 31 museums included here skewed decidedly towards contemporary art. Only 2% of those acquisitions represent works created before 1900. So historical women artists remain woefully under-collected. In the Arts of the Americas department, we have looked at our own data on recent acquisitions in particular of women makers, and the numbers are rather encouraging. Over the last 8 years, 33% of our acquisitions were works by named female makers. Now, I anticipate that stat will ebb and flow over the years as we seek out and assess collecting opportunities as they come. But with our renewed focus on this task, we are moving the needle in the right direction, all the while recognizing the distance yet to go. Notably, we're not starting from zero. Long-standing female artists in the Americas collection include Georgia O'Keeffe, likely one of the most recognized names among this group. The museum has strong holdings of her work, beginning with Black Cross, New Mexico of 1929, which we acquired in 1943. The Art Institute hosted the artist's first museum retrospective that year, and this painting was purchased out of the exhibition for the museum collection. In the decades since then, over 20 other paintings and drawings by this American modernist have joined the collection, including the monumental Sky Above Clouds 4, painted in 1965, here on view at another solo exhibition on O'Keeffe in 1971, and acquired in 1983. O'Keeffe will take center stage this summer in the upcoming show, Georgia O'Keeffe, My New Yorks, the first solo exhibition on the artist at the Art Institute since 1987. While celebrated for her images of flowers and southwestern landscapes, her city subjects have received relatively little attention. Beginning in 1924, the artist lived seasonally in the newly built Shelton Hotel in Midtown Manhattan, then the tallest residential building of its kind. Its soaring heights inspired a rich period of experimentation, including this standout painting in the museum's collection, The Shelton with Sunspots, New York. This exhibition is the first to seriously examine O'Keeffe's paintings, drawings, and pastels of the built environment, while also situating them within the diverse context of her compositions of the 1920s and early 1930s. Her New Yorks, as she called them, were an important component of her modernist investigation in these years. I'm co-curating this exhibition with my colleague, Sarah Kelly-Oler, chair of the Arts of the Americas department. We are in the last stretch of this years-long project and so excited to share this story and O'Keeffe's keen modernist vision with all of you. We have some amazing loans coming to the museum. Alongside our efforts to study, expand, and highlight historical women artists in our permanent collection, we must also mount solo exhibitions on such figures and give them their due attention, celebrate their work, and deepen the scholarship in the process. Another artist, long part of the collection, is Mary Cassatt. Her work has been on display at the Art Institute for over 100 years. The only U.S. artist to exhibit with the French Impressionists, Cassatt garnered international acclaim early in her career, and museums were quick to acquire her works during her lifetime. The Child's Bath of 1893 at Left was the first Cassatt to enter the Art Institute's collection, purchased in 1910, and numerous works followed, such as The Gift in 1922 at Right, a pastel called Mother's Goodnight Kiss. I'm thrilled to share that an exhibition of Mary Cassatt is in development at the Art Institute for 2026. Some of you may remember the retrospective on the artist organized here in 1998 to 99. More than 25 years later, it is certainly time to showcase Cassatt again in a solo exhibition, and it is with great enthusiasm that I undertake this project as curator. Now, back to some other women artists who have long been in the museum's collection. Their names may be familiar, perhaps less so. Elizabeth Sparhawk Jones worked in a painterly style that drew on both realism and impressionism. She trained in Philadelphia, and in Shop Girls at Left, she portrayed female employees at work at a city department store. Modernist and Illinois native Doris Lee, whose Thanksgiving is at center, created lively figurative scenes in a deliberately unpolished style. And finally, Gertrude Abercrombie, a Chicagoan, was a singular and visionary force who painted in a surrealist style. The Past and the Present at Right is an example of her personalized musings, a composition that invites questions but offers no tidy explanation of its own. Sparhawk Jones first entered the museum's collection in 1912 with Shop Girls. Lee's Thanksgiving joined in the 1930s, and The Past and the Present was the first of several paintings by Abercrombie to be acquired, this in 1978, the year after the artist's death. The above examples of works by women have been part of the permanent collection for a long while and have oftentimes been on view. Another component of our efforts is to better understand and recognize what we have. This means taking a hard look at objects in storage and creating opportunities for artworks to make an impact in the galleries once again. This is one such work, A Young Mother of 1898 by Bessie Potter Vano, a trailblazing modeler who made a place for herself in the male-dominated field of sculpture at the turn of the 20th century. The artist's story begins here in Chicago. She studied at the Art Institute, the School of the Art Institute, and later undertook public commissions for monumental sculpture at the 1893 World's Fair, also known as the World's Columbian Exposition. Then from her studio in Chicago in the mid-1890s, she built a national reputation, choosing to specialize in small-scale statuettes that suited domestic spaces. Alongside A Young Mother, I'm showing you at right another collection in our work, Girl Dancing. Vano's subject matter is ostensibly traditional: womanhood, motherhood, childhood, domesticity. Yet she made her figures distinctly modern through experiments in scale, material, and level of finish. Her surfaces are suggestive and earthy rather than detailed and polished. They are decidedly impressionist in spirit. I first brought out A Young Mother from storage in 2021. As part of my research for this installation, I dug into our institutional records and learned that when the Art Institute purchased several of her works in 1895, Bessie Potter, later Vano, became the first named woman sculptor represented in the permanent collection. That's a great first, and she was also just 22 years old at the time. Today, you can find a young mother in Gallery 161, also known as the Sculpture Court, a prominent location in the Americas galleries. Another work that has recently been given new life in the galleries is the painting at left by Jessie Arms Bodke called Geese and Hollyhocks. The artist created striking decorative effects by filling the composition around the 4 geese with flowers and vegetation. Bodke was a Chicago artist. She too studied at the School of the Art Institute, working as a painter and a muralist. She also specialized in textiles, producing designs for tapestries and decorative panels for a New York firm. Oftentimes featuring renderings of birds, Bodke drew inspiration from Japanese woodblock prints, exploring the formal qualities of flatness, patterning, and line. Geese and Hollyhocks was painted in 1917 and was purchased for the museum's collection the following year. Over the last several decades, it has not often been on view, and so I was really delighted to bring it out of storage, renew our attention to its qualities, and let it shine in the galleries. Hung nearby in Gallery 171 is At the River's Bend by Lilla Cabot Perry, which I show you at right, one of the first American artists to embrace Impressionism. While living in France, she befriended Claude Monet and became an important advocate for this new painting in her native Boston. In this vibrant composition, the artist brought together a sensitive figure study modeled by one of her daughters and a sun-dappled landscape. The painting is another recent acquisition. It came in 2020. Creating new narratives and connections in gallery spaces relies on reconsidering works already in the collection, such as Bodke's, in combination with the pursuit of new acquisitions, like Perry. Both women were active participants in the art world in their own time, and their presence in the gallery today is a worthy one, adding breadth and nuance to our presentation of turn of the 20th century American painting. My focus over the last several years has been on growing the Americas collection in impactful ways by seeking out additional women makers. There is a tremendous amount of knowledge building and work behind the scenes that needs to be done to support this goal. It is easy, of course, for overlooked artists to continue to be overlooked. Intent on bringing more of these names to the fore, I work in a number of ways to surface artists' voices and their stories. I'm reading new scholarship, staying in touch with dealers and upcoming auctions, and also following what I would call breadcrumb leads that can be discovered in the course of some research. For instance, there have been robust networks of female artists and professional organizations. So sometimes when your head's down in research on one artist, you uncover glimpses of another artist in the historical record. And these can be moments when, as a researcher, you bookmark that connection or constellation of activity. Down the road, you might find reason to pick up on this trail and take your research in a new direction. Remember Jane Emmett DeGlenn in Sargent's painting? She helped me build a pathway to Ellen Emmet Rand. It is this task of connecting the dots between biographies, objects, and archives that is so crucial to making headway incrementally and building momentum. With my remaining time today, I would like to look at a number of recent acquisitions in the department in more detail. Let's leap across that historical gap between now and then, encounter each artist, hear her voice, and look closely at her work. In short, an object can be a point of departure for an aesthetic experience in the present that is rooted in a particular past. Lilly Martin Spencer was a remarkable force in the art world in the mid-19th century. Establishing herself in Cincinnati and relocating to New York in 1848, Spencer supported her large family with her art, becoming one of the most popular U.S. artists of her day. She specialized in genre paintings, often positioning women at the center of these vivid portrayals of domestic life. And that's the case here in the Art Institute's recent acquisition, This Little Pig Went to Market, painted about 1857, where a mother is playing a nursery rhyme with the child on her lap. The figures were likely modeled by the artist herself and one of her sons. The woman holds the child and squeezes his big toe, enacting the first verse of the nursery rhyme. This little pig went to market, this little pig stayed home, etc. Spencer's composition is replete with skillful passages of meticulous realism and polished brushwork, and I show a couple of details here. Genre pictures were also known as scenes of everyday life, presenting persuasive windows onto the world. It is important to note, however, that genre scenes are painted from a particular position. Distinctions of class, race, gender, region, or political affiliation typically structure these compositions. Spencer tended to portray the everyday activities of white, urban, middle-class households like her own. With this acquisition for the museum's collection, we now have an 1850s genre painting by a woman artist that pictures this situational slice of American art and culture. Spencer painted constantly. She exhibited her works widely, marketed herself to secure commissions, and partnered with art firms to have prints produced from her paintings in an effort to reach new audiences. She sold This Little Pig Went to Market to a commercial art organization. They then exhibited the painting at their New York gallery, published an engraving of the work, which you see at right, and then raffled off the original painting to one lucky winner. Spencer's fame at mid-century was considerable. Popular success, however, did not translate easily into financial security. Spencer worked hard throughout her career to support her large family with her art. Her own middle-class position was a precarious one, dependent on the continual production and sale of her artworks. Her husband never did secure steady work with his skills as a tailor. The couple raised 7 children. Spencer, in all, endured 13 pregnancies. There is fascinating archival material on the artist, including a trove of correspondence that helps to bring Spencer and her career to life. I show you here an excerpt of a letter that she wrote to her parents in 1859. Spencer makes clear that acclaim alone will not pay the bills. She wrote, "You may think, dear mother, that because you read so many puffs about me, that my fame does me a great deal of good, but it does not. Fame is as hollow and brilliant as a soap bubble. It's all colors outside and nothing worth kicking at inside," unquote. In the area of landscape, we recently acquired this jewel-like composition by Julie Hart Beers entitled Looking Upon the River, painted in 1880. Although numerous women artists contributed to the 19th century movement in U.S. landscape painting known as the Hudson River School, they remain underrepresented in museum collections. A standout among this group is Beers, whose atmospheric landscapes of New York and New England drew critical attention in her own time. Beers' decision to become an artist grew out of both ambition and necessity. Her husband died young, leaving her 2 young children to raise. Her brothers were painters, and she seized the opportunity that this connection to the art world presented for both training and studio space. Beginning in the 1860s, Beers built a successful career, supporting herself and her family through the sale of her artwork and by taking on a steady stream of students. In her capacity as teacher, Beers routinely led sketching outings throughout New England for groups of women. In an 1876 interview, a journalist asked how she found time for her pictures with so many pupils. And I love the unflinching determination in her reply. Beers said, quote, "Because I go directly from my class to my easel, I lose no time in between, and I give no time to outside things," unquote. This acquisition led to a fruitful collaboration with my colleagues in conservation and science. One of the great rewards of bringing a new work into the collection is the opportunities it presents for learning together and sharing expertise across the museum. In this case, Looking Upon the River underwent a treatment to address 2 competing levels of varnish on the surface. As a result, the painting now truly glows in the galleries with its striking keyhole composition and detailed brushwork. Now let's return to Rand. A couple generations younger than Beers, she was among a group of strong women in the late 19th and early 20th centuries who sought a level of artistic professionalism on par with their male peers. And this she achieved, executing nearly 800 portraits over the course of her long and successful career, supporting herself and her family all the while, and exhibiting widely from early on. Ellen Emmet, later Rand, was born in San Francisco in 1875, moving to New York a few years later. Like her three older cousins, Rosina, Lydia, and Jane, Ellen sought artistic training at home and abroad, enrolling at the Art Students League and eventually heading to Paris, where she studied for 3 years. This is a portrait of Rand by her studio mate, the artist Mary Foote. The work was probably done between 1897 and 1900 during their years together in Paris. An important archive of the extended Emmet family of painters is preserved at the Archives of American Art, a division of the Smithsonian. And here, in ample correspondence, the voices of Ellen, as well as her cousins, enliven the historical record, offering tidbits of personality and determination. Rand's letters home depict a vivid picture of her talent and ambition. For instance, in a moment of financial insecurity, she insisted, quote, "Don't raise a fund for me," unquote, and made plain her professional priorities in a letter to her cousin Jane. Ellen wrote, "Paris is a place to root and hog and, if necessary, die in. America will be our destination, but not until we've learned our trades, even if it involves a garret and a crust a day," unquote. By 1900, Rand's confidence and finesse as a painter were on firm footing. She returned to New York and launched her career. Let's take a closer look at the Art Institute's work, which was painted much later in 1925. In a shallow space, a figure sits with her back to the viewer. Facing a mirror, the woman reveals an intense gaze in reflection. The portrayal is direct and assertive in nature. The composition features wonderful passages of Rand's assured brushwork and vibrant palette, with purples, blues, greens, and peach laid on in swift painterly strokes. This is a figure study, but it is not a portrait, and the work remains a bit of a puzzle. The woman's fitted dress and its voluminous fabric do not suggest the contemporary fashions of the 1920s, yet the composition's close cropping and the interior's spare setting offer little additional clues. It was not known to be exhibited, so we don't have press reviews or catalogs to consult. Yet another of Rand's paintings, a second large-scale composition featuring the same figure, likewise executed in 1925, reveals an element of the artist's working method and a context for understanding our painting's meanings. The work at right is titled The 60s. Here we see a full view of the figure who is wearing that same dress and hat, this time positioned towards the viewer with her eyes cast downward. Intended for exhibition, The 60s, referring to the 1860s, was a purposefully nostalgic and sentimental composition, highlighted by the woman's period bustled gown and the threads of an unknown narrative contained in the letter in her hand. Woman Before the Mirror, in distinction, is both a related study and a finished composition. It demonstrates Rand's working through of compositional strategies, resulting in this fresh, dynamic painting that is arguably the stronger of the two. The full story of the painting, the conditions of its creation, and subsequent histories remains a mystery. I recently visited the University of Connecticut, home of the Ellen Emmet Rand papers, in an effort to piece together the storyline. But archives can be tricky things. What gets preserved is oftentimes partial rather than comprehensive. Items get lost over time or overlooked or repurposed or willfully discarded. And the Rand papers offered some near misses. A trove of diaries, but not from the right years. Correspondence, newspaper clippings, sketchbooks, plenty of material to comb through, but none that illuminated Woman Before the Mirror. I came away from my archival visit with one tantalizing detail, the name of the model who sat for Rand. She is Burdella, a first name, something that helps humanize the turn of events that resulted in this painting, but that's it. Research can be exhilarating and frustrating, and sometimes a bit of both. Let's move to another recent acquisition, a large, lively painting that depicts a community of female makers. This is The Milliners, painted in 1921 by Theresa Bernstein. The artist highlighted the experiences of women, immigrants, and the working classes in early 20th century New York and beyond in energetic, painterly compositions rooted in realism. Her career spanned the whole of the 20th century. Bernstein lived to be 111 years old. She was a Jewish immigrant born in Krakow in 1890, immigrating with her parents that same year to Philadelphia. She trained there and then relocated to New York in 1911, finding her subject matter in the everyday. She was soon exhibiting alongside such artists as Robert Henry, John Sloan, and George Bellows, names all found on the traditional roll call of urban realists. Here I show you an installation view of the Milliners in Gallery 272, hung next to a work by Sloan at left, who became a close friend. At right is a painting by Everett Shinn, another realist in this group. Bernstein granted visibility and value to everyday people, anchoring her paintings in communal activities, typically in urban spaces. Here, she scaled up the meticulous artistic labor of fashioning women's hats. Gathered around a table, 6 individuals sew ribbons, feathers, and flowers onto headpieces. The woman at left, in distinction, tries on a hat, and another woman at right has paused from her work, her eyes meeting ours. The setting appears to be a city apartment. The Milliners then are engaged at piecework at home to earn extra income. Bernstein captured the sensation of working in a cramped space, as well as the feeling of community among those focused on a shared set of tasks. Inspired by a visit to the shop where her sister-in-law worked as a milliner, Bernstein then leaned on the women in her own family to serve as models and to bring the painting to life. The artist's large, bold pictures captivated critics of the period. Yet, in their words of seeming praise, it is clear that gender inequities skewed the playing field. For instance, in 1919, a journalist for the New York Herald wrote, quote, "There is nothing feminine about the paintings of Theresa Bernstein. It's with a man's vision that the artist looks at her subjects in the streets, the elevated railroad trains, at the beaches and the parks. Then, having found what she wants, it's with a man's vigor that she gets it down to stay," unquote. We are fortunate in terms of archival materials to have Bernstein's voice preserved in a number of writings, which include several works published late in her life. And it is here in these memoirs that a reflective Bernstein took such gendered praise to task. She wrote, quote, "Having power in one's work suggests masculinity, but why couldn't it have suggested femininity? After all, the basis of life is in the feminine as well," unquote. I love that assertion by Bernstein, aligning femininity and power. Near the Milliners, in the same gallery, 272, is this work by Abastenia St. Eberle, entitled Sea Treasures, which dates to 1911 and represents another recent acquisition to the collection. Born in Iowa and later based in New York, Eberle was a settlement house worker and sculptor who principally depicted women from urban immigrant communities in small-scale bronzes. She, in essence, granted power and visibility to her everyday female subjects, portrayed at moments of work or at play. Here, an adolescent girl inspects marine life along the shore at Coney Island. The composition is unexpected and engaging as the figure reaches down and bends forward. Her hiked-up skirt, rolled sleeves, and awkward pose suggest a contemporary figure momentarily captivated in a world unto her own. I'd like to introduce you to another recent acquisition of sculpture. This is Musician and Dancer by Augusta Savage. A woman artist of color, she was a path-breaking sculptor, teacher, and intellectual leader of the Harlem Renaissance in the early decades of the 20th century. Born in Florida in 1892, Augusta Fells, later Savage, was drawn to modeling and sculpture at an early age. Determined to pursue a professional career, she moved to New York in 1921 and immediately enrolled at the Cooper Union. In 1923, Savage won a scholarship for a summer arts program in Fontainebleau, France. When the award was abruptly rescinded in an act of racism, Savage spoke out publicly. The sculptor's words in the press are foundational in terms of early archival material on Savage. In the New York World, she stated plainly, quote, "I hear so many complaints to the effect that Negroes do not take advantage of the educational opportunities offered them. For how am I to compete with other American artists if I am not to be given the same opportunity?" Unquote. And at right, I'm showing you another press clipping on the affair. This one appeared in the Chicago Defender. Savage did eventually travel to France, not until 1929, securing a multi-year grant from the Julius Rosenwald Fund. Upon returning to New York in 1932, Savage undertook a number of important positions, including directing a studio and an art center and undertaking a public commission for sculpture at the 1939 New York World's Fair. Not all of the artist's work survives. Savage oftentimes made finished casts of her sculpture in plaster, a fragile material, as casting in bronze was an expensive undertaking. The Art Institute's works are indeed made of plaster, painted by Savage in a metallic-like brown to replicate the look of bronze. The sculpture achieved a remarkably lively interaction among this musical pair. The musician twists at the waist and throws back his shoulders, while the dancer leans off his vertical axis, full of kinetic energy. There are more artists to introduce and stories to tell. We're really in the midst of doing the work of recognizing artists, surfacing names and artworks, researching their histories, and so I find that I have a lot to share with all of you. So I'd like to briefly call out just a few more works. For instance, the Americas Department made this exciting acquisition in 2021, Head of a Man by Elizabeth Catlett, a trailblazing Black woman artist who worked as a sculptor, a printmaker, and teacher in the US and Mexico in the mid-20th century and into the 21st. Catlett carved this figure in stone shortly after graduating in 1940 from the University of Iowa with an MFA, the first artist to complete the new program there, studying under Grant Wood, as a matter of fact. The acquisition is the first three-dimensional object by Catlett in the museum's collection and is now on view in the American Modernism galleries in 264, and the Augusta Savage pair is right nearby in 263. Catlett will be the subject of a major exhibition at the Art Institute in 2025. And so the artist and her work in multiple media will come to the fore at the museum next year. Our focus today has been on historical artists, but I do wish to draw your attention to one of a number of fantastic recent acquisitions in the Americas Department of works by contemporary female makers. Here, Kelly Church, a Potawatomi and Ottawa artist and culture keeper. Church harvests black ash trees and works the fibers into magnificent woven baskets, such as this one, called Sustaining Traditions, Digital Teachings. Church is mindful of the long line of basket makers in her family, as well as her own role in this artistic lineage. She has witnessed the devastation wrought by the emerald ash borer, an invasive insect that has wiped out trees in her Michigan community. As a result, this indigenous tradition of making faces enormous risks. Here, Church has practiced her skillful weaving while also looking to protect the art's future. Inside the basket, a USB drive holds teaching instructions, preserving knowledge for generations to come. Near Church's basket, this lyrical group of works is also on view in Gallery 262, unveiled in 2022 as part of a reimagining of the galleries of American modernisms. These large-scale ceramics are all by Toshiko Takiezu, a Hawaiian-born artist of Okinawan and Japanese descent, who specialized in incredibly complex and finely glazed closed-form vessels. She intended for them to be floor sculptures, and indeed they have a thrilling presence in the space. This is another example of finding an opportunity to bring a great set of works by a female maker out of storage and to add Takiezu's contributions to abstraction and three-dimensional modernism to our narratives in the galleries. In the area of American decorative arts and design, there has been a monumental addition to the collection of late. In 2021, the museum debuted the brilliant Hartwell Memorial window at the top of the Woman's Board Grand Staircase. Agnes Northrup, a foremost designer of landscapes and stained glass for Tiffany Studios, conceived of this view of the White Mountains for a commission in 1917. For 100 years, the work was situated in the sanctuary of the Community Church of Providence in Rhode Island. In 2018, the window was carefully deinstalled from the church and relocated to Chicago. As the steward of the window, the museum has conserved and installed the work to wonderful effect, just steps from the Michigan Avenue entrance and right outside the store. A huge undertaking that drew on the expertise and skill of a great team of colleagues. Finally, a glimpse of one of our newest acquisitions, likewise on glass on a much smaller scale. Here, oil reverse painted on glass by Rebecca Salisbury James, entitled Happy Home, Bowl of Vegetables from 1940. James was a modernist painter who took inspiration from the histories of folk art. She worked among such artists as Georgia O'Keeffe, Alfred Stieglitz, Paul Strand, and Marston Hartley in New York and New Mexico. One of her largest works in the medium, it is a luminous composition and will add a new dimension to the galleries when it debuts in the coming months. What I've shared with you today represents a portion of the work that my colleagues and I are doing in the Americas Department to reinvest in the permanent collection and make impactful acquisitions. And these efforts join those of many more colleagues in the museum's 10 other curatorial departments and across the museum more broadly. Collectively, there is still a long way to go in support of women artists, but I am encouraged that this is meaningful work that we can continue to do together. Alongside these recent wins, challenges do remain. With respect to possible acquisitions, sometimes identifying artists worth pursuing in and of itself can be difficult. Often there isn't a large body of scholarship that you can readily consult. The auction records may be slim, spotty, or non-existent. Works may be largely held in private collections rather than public institutions. There are hurdles, in short, to both information and access. Instead, you have to piece together period and modern resources to build an archive and gather a critical mass of research materials on a particular artist. This involves both surfacing and evaluating sources and ascertaining, eventually, what you have, what you don't have, and what is most critical to seek out in order to make an informed decision about an acquisition opportunity. Additionally, as curator, sometimes you have to play a long waiting game in terms of finding the right object on the art market for the collection. In some cases, the next win can take years. Particularly important to me is to consider how I can pay it forward. In the longer term, the project of revaluing and elevating women artists really needs all hands on deck. This means doing the work of writing new scholarship in the form of essays, exhibition catalogs, monographs, presentations, and more, so that the next researcher or curator in pursuit of information on such and such female maker can find your work on the library shelf or database and put it to good use for their own acquisition or study. Naming matters. We must continue the critical work of naming names and giving those names nuance and voices and sufficient context and histories so that individual artists and their works can stand on their own and resonate for a multitude of museum visitors, readers, learners, and art enthusiasts today. Elevating women artists is about representation across activities and spaces. What's on view in the galleries, new works in the collection, exhibition programming, digital experiences, and public events such as this one today. I'm thrilled that the Americas Department will mount 3 solo exhibitions on historical women artists in the coming years. O'Keeffe this summer, Catlett in 2025, and Cassatt in 2026, so mark your calendars. So I'll put this slide back up and pose the question one more time. Can you name 5 women artists? I hope you can answer yes. I can name 5 and then some more. In support of women artists, there is certainly more work to do, as well as opportunities to cultivate ahead. I am committed to being part of it and making contributions step by step by step. A heartfelt thank you for your time. I've so enjoyed sharing all of this with you. We do have a little time for questions, so if you raise your hand, I think we have 2 folks with microphones, and we'll try to answer a few if there are any. Otherwise, go out to the museum and enjoy these works in person.
I have one right down here, Annelise. Straight ahead of you, straight ahead.
Oh, I'm gonna take my glasses off.
I noticed that 3 of the funders for the acquisition of these works were men. It looked like 2 brothers and the McCormicks, and then the, is it Seep? I don't know. And I'm wondering if, when they set up the funds, if they said, please collect women artists.
A lot of times there are some kind of restrictions around funds. Sometimes there aren't. You know, it might be for a certain kind of artwork or area of the collection. I can give you one example. Was we recently had a bequest from Muriel Kogan, who specifically earmarked those funds for Hudson River School landscape painting. And we used part of those funds to buy a painting by Julie Hart Beers. So, you know, we were able to make that choice within a body of, you know, work or opportunity, but we had an opportunity there to direct it, you know, where we thought it could make great impact in the collection. Well, thank you all for coming, and I hope that you've left enough time to go to the galleries and look at some of these works in person, because it's better than a slide. Thank you.